Hello and good evening. You're welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Anne Duncan, and today I'm joined by Linda Fabiani in today's discussion. Really nice to see you, Linda. How are you?
I'm absolutely grand, thank you, Anne. And how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. It was really lovely to see you over the weekend.
Yeah, I had a lovely time at SNP conference over the weekend, and I'm absolutely stunned, Anne, at all the reports I've been seeing about the flat conference and no policy. It wasn't flat at all. Everyone was really upbeat, so glad to see each other in person after all these Zoom conferences that we've had.
Yes, I got a lot of feedback about the same. Everybody was just so happy to be able to be there in person and to
Yeah,
meet friends and colleagues. Yeah. And it was lovely to meet you in person as well.
and you, and
Yeah, right. We're gonna go to Ukraine update day 232. After retreating around 20 kilometers in the north of Kherson sector in the early October, Russian forces are likely attempting to consolidate a new front line west from the village of Milov, according to the latest UK Ministry of Defense report. Ukraine State Emergency Services said a 12-year-old boy has been rescued after 12 hours under the rubble after rocket hit five-storied residential building in Mykolaiv. Ukraine's power grid has been established Ukraine's power grid has been stabilized after Russia's strikes on the country that in particular targeted energy infrastructure, causing power and hot water cuts. The national energy operator Ukrenago said on Thursday. Russia said it had summoned diplomats from Germany, Denmark, and Sweden to complain that representatives from Moscow and Gazprom had not been involved to join an investigation into ruptures of the Nord Stream gas pipelines. The United Nations General Assembly overwhelmingly voted to condemn Russia's annexation of parts of Ukraine on Wednesday, with just 35 nations abstaining, including China, India, South Africa, and Pakistan. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Ukraine currently only has 10% of what it needs in terms of air defenses. UK Defense Secretary Ben Wallace said that Russia will run out of supplies and armaments before the West does. He said procurement processes were in place among allies in the West that will ensure that the international community will be able to continue arming Ukraine for years ahead. Turkey's aim is to stop the bloodshed in the Russia-Ukraine war as soon as possible, despite hurdles. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has told a regional summit in Kazakhstan. Germany Chancellor Olaf Scholz said today that the war in Ukraine was part of a broader movement against the West and a crusade against liberal democracy by Russia. Recently released satellite images show a close view of traffic and bridge repair work on the collapsed part of the Kerch Bridge in Crimea. The images made available by Maxar Technologies are dated 12th October. A Russian nuclear strike would almost certainly trigger a physical response from Ukraine's allies and potentially from NATO. A senior NATO official is reported to have said Ukraine's army boasted of territorial gains near the strategically vital southern city of Kherson last night. 5 settlements in the Berislav district in the northeast of the Kherson region, Nova, Nova, Novovarslyska, Novogrogavka, and Novokamierka, and Trifovrika Chevron was said to have been taken from Russian forces over the day. Linda really had places to pronounce in Russia, in Ukraine.
I was sitting here and I was thinking, I'm glad it's not me that has to mention all these names. They're so difficult for us.
Yes.
They just they're so unlike our own language here. It must be really difficult for you. My goodness.
Yeah,
Well done.
sometimes. Yeah. Yeah. So that's
Yeah,
the
well, we're
update in
carrying on.
Ukraine.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, on it goes. And again, I have to say that the detailed reports that we get from Broadcasting Scotland are way beyond what I hear anywhere else. You know, it doesn't seem to be getting any better. Though the international community, of course, is always reinforcing support for Ukraine and democracy, and I'm always glad to hear that. And, you know, even though the likes of China and India haven't signed up, you know, to UN resolutions like others, there does seem to be a bit of a cooling towards Putin and Russia from these states and indeed Turkey as well. So.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. If we can move on, growing pressure on Liz Truss to U-turn on tax cuts. Liz Truss is rumored to be on the brink of putting up corporation tax as part of a Downing Street plan to back down from the huge package of unfunded tax cuts in her mini budget. However, Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng ducked questions on whether the government was about to make a major U-turn, insisting that his position hasn't changed on the 23rd September mini-budget. The Prime Minister has been under intense pressure from jittery Conservative MPs to stage a major economic U-turn to calm the markets in the face of a financial storm, but risks a split with her Chancellor if she proceeds. Reversing the cut to corporation tax would represent a massive climb down, as her promise to cancel Rishi Sunak's plan to put corporation tax up from 19% to 25% as a central pledge of her leadership campaign. SNP Minister Leader Ian Blackford, MP, said that Liz Truss has been a disaster as Prime Minister. He said that in just a few short weeks, Liz Truss had trashed the UK economy and put people's homes, pensions, and incomes under threat. Mr. Blackford said Prime Minister has run out of time and credibility. Tory MPs must put the economy first and force her to change direction now or show her the door. Another U-turn might be humiliating for Ms. Truss, but the Tories will never be forgiven if they fail to act. It's essential the U-turn comes immediately. With every day they delay, the Tories are inflicting more damage to household incomes as mortgages rise, pensions fall, and other UK economy flounders. Dithering until 31st of October will only make the damage worse. Coming to you, Linda. Yeah, more and more pressure for Liz Truss.
Well, yeah, but they don't appear to listen. Now, I don't know anyone apart from die-hard Tories who think for 1 minute that she and Kwarteng should not U-turn immediately. Everyone, all the economists, look at the Bank of England, all the foundations and think tanks, regardless of what side of the argument they're on in terms of free markets, etc., are all saying that this Prime Minister and Chancellor have to make changes immediately because what they are doing is disastrous for the economy of the UK. And of course, the effect on Scotland is absolutely horrendous. Now, Scotland has not for decades been a fan of the Tories. However, 68% of Scots are saying that they believe the Tories are completely to blame for this crashing of the UK economy and the crashing of the pound. It's affecting absolutely every walk of life, but it's affecting those with the least income the most. The strain and the worry must be absolutely horrendous for people. The Resolution Foundation said today that this could be costing the poorest families up to £1,000. I mean, it's awful what they're doing. Apart from the morality of it, I'm not seeing any economic sense in it either. It just seems like stubbornness. And now, from reports, there's all these Conservative MPs who are saying that they should change as well, corporation tax, tax cuts, all of this. So why will they not just do it? They've already done it in some things. So, they're not going to make it wonderful,
Yeah.
but they could stem even further damage.
Yeah. Now, moving on, Resolution Foundation say poorer families risk £1,000 hit from earnings-related benefits rise. If the UK government rises benefit in line with earnings rather than inflation next year, it would drastically cut the incomes of poorer working age families while saving less than a tenth of the cost of recent tax cuts, a leading economic think tank has calculated. Such a change, which would mean a significant real terms cut, given that wages are rising at 5.5%, with inflation close to 10%, could see the effective income of some families reduced by up to £1,000 a year. The Resolution Foundation said. In a report, it said this decision would end up saving about £3 billion by 2026 to 2027, whereas the tax cuts announced by Kwasi Kwarteng mini budget would cost about £40 billion, even now that one of them, scrapping the top 45p rate of tax, has been reversed. While ministers appear committed to increasing pensions in line with inflation under the so-called triple lock upgrade suspended last year, they have yet to decide whether the same will apply to working age benefits. Jacob Rees-Mogg, the UK government business secretary, said on Wednesday that no decision would be made before the next publication of inflation statistics due in a week. A number of Conservative MPs, including other cabinet ministers, support the increase in line with inflation. If the increase for working benefits such as universal credit was made at a lower earnings linked rate, this would affect 9 million UK households, or 45% of those that include working age people, the Resolution Foundation said. The impact would vary considerably. The report calculated that a couple with one child who only receives child benefit would lose £52 a year. A single disabled adult on universal credit would lose £380. The biggest effect would be on low-income families with children. A working couple with 3 children would lose £978 a year, it said. The SNP has challenged Scottish Tory leader Douglas Ross and his fellow Scottish Conservative MPs to back calls for benefits to increase in line inflation rather than in line with earnings, which would mean the largest ever real terms benefit cut in a single year. SNP MSP Cowcub Stewart said it is staggering that households are increasingly struggling from the Tory-created cost of living crisis. Liz Truss and her chaotic government are set to impose the largest ever real terms cut to benefits in a single year. It illustrates exactly why Scotland needs independence to escape the damage of Westminster control for good. It is well past time for Douglas Ross to do the right thing for once and tell Liz Truss she can't continue to make the least well-off in our society pay for the failures of this Tory government.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the gap is getting wider between those at the top of the scale, those with, Rees-Mogg and folk like his cronies don't need to worry, and they just stand there and pontificate about it. And then you have people who are at the lowest end of the market for all sorts of reasons, all sorts of reasons.
Yeah.
And those that need the most help get the least. And, this is a Tory, one of a succession of Tory governments that called it welfare reform, but actually cut benefits, sanctioned people, imposed all sorts of horrendous rules like the two-child cap, the benefit cap, and all these things. And now they're not even increasing benefits to the level of inflation. So people are becoming poorer and poorer. And again, and it's all, when you look at what's happening in Scotland, and you have a Scottish government that's trying to mitigate the worst of these things by initiatives like child payments, etc. There's only so much they can do. People are seriously suffering, and we have a very uncaring Conservative government down the road in Westminster. And the Scottish Conservatives are proving themselves to be exactly the same, because they should be standing up for Scotland, they should be standing up for the people that they purport to represent, and calling on their colleagues in Westminster to do the right thing and increase benefits in line with inflation. But
Yeah.
instead, they're too busy running about trying to accuse Scotland's First Minister of hate crime. Absolute blooming nonsense. Most people in Scotland detest the Tory government and the Tory policies, and to call it a hate crime, to put into words what most people think, is just ludicrous. They're just trying to divert from the fact that they are doing nothing, absolutely nothing, to try and help people in Scotland.
Yeah. I wish I was reading more positive news, but UK housing
Yeah.
market on
Oh.
verge of crash. Homeowners will struggle to make mortgage repayments, and repossessions will rise next year as soaring interest rates and falling prices mark the end of the UK's 13-year housing market boom. According to sobering report from the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, RICS, the number of inquiries from potential home buyers fell for a fifth month in a row in September, while sales fell to the lowest level since May 2020, when the housing market all but ground to a halt during the early stages of the coronavirus pandemic. It said the number of new instructions to sell has continued to fall. Stock levels are at historic lows, with estate agents on average listing just 34 homes on their books. House prices have remained resilient due to the limited supplies for sale, but the pace of growing is rapidly slowing, with forecast at least a 10% price fall next year as surging interest rates heap pressure on household budgets. Since the UK government's mini budget, average mortgage rates have risen to a 14-year high. The average 2-year fixed mortgage rate has risen to 6.46%, and the average 5-year rate has risen to 6.32%, the highest level since 2008 financial crisis. The Bank of England has forecast 1.7 million UK mortgage holders will have to refinance their house in the coming year and face much higher rates. It warned the number of people struggling to pay their mortgages will rise sharply in 2023, with around 800,000 households having to spend more than 70% of their take-home pay on mortgage or rent and essentials. Commenting, SNP Shadow Chancellor Alison Tullis, MP, said the Tories trashed the UK economy with their disastrous budget, and now Liz Truss is taking the UK on the verge of a housing crash. The mortgage rates rise and unsustainable levels. The Prime Minister has created a gathering storm of economic turmoil. She's putting Scottish homeowners and renters under threat and demonstrating exactly why Scotland needs independence to escape the constant chaos of Westminster control. Linda, this comes after we've just received a poll that shows 68% of Scotland blames the Tory budget for drop in the pound.
Well, yeah, I mean, the blame sits quite squarely with the Tory government, sits quite squarely with the new Prime Minister and her Chancellor, who are so intransigent in what they do. The housing situation is dire when you look at what's happening to mortgage rates. And, you know, there's the figure, I can't remember, Anne, what the figure is for the number of people that are likely to go for remortgaging and refinancing as a result of this. And what that
800,000.
is, it really? Oh my. And what that does is that brings in the thoughts of negative equity as well. You know, when you look at that, when you look at the potential for house prices falling, and then you look at repossessions, it's horrendous. It's actually a result of you know, policies over decades that have started to look at houses as investments instead of as homes, you know, and encouraging housing as investment. You know, when you look at it all in the bigger package, um, you know, the buy to rent thing, then you get private landlords, and then you get rent rises, you get repossessions, the erosion of the social housing stock because the Conservatives' right to buy was very badly managed and was all about profit. And it all comes together. This is what happened in the 1980s as well, the overheating of the housing market. And, you know, I keep hearing Conservative MPs saying things like, oh, it's the same all over the world, it's the same all over Europe. No, it's not. Because in a lot of the European countries, there's a very different philosophy about the supply of houses and also mortgages. I was looking into this the other day, and you know, there's people in France who are getting long-term mortgages at 2% fixed. So no, it's not happening all over the continent. It's happening here as a result of disastrous economic policies that are being imposed by the current government. And they really have to get a grip on this because the situation is going to get worse and worse. And it spreads out even beyond housing supply. And this is what always frustrated me, even when I was a professional politician, is the lack of looking at the bigger picture. Because if you have people who are really scared of losing their homes. That affects their mental health. That then affects the health service and expenditure. It affects everything that we do as a society. And we really have to be saying there are basics in society that should be givens that mean people don't have to worry themselves sick. And one of these very basics is shelter. And that's what a lot of people are worried about losing.
Yeah. Scotland achieves record renewable generation output. A total of 7,358 gigawatt hours of renewable electricity was generated in April, May, and June 2022, a 36% increase on the same quarter last year and more than 25% greater than any second quarter previously recorded. This contributed to 18,568 gigawatts hour of renewable electricity being generated in the first half of 2022, up to 29% on the same period in 2021. Higher wind speed, increased rainfall, and additional capacity coming online contributed to the increases. Renewable electricity capacity increased by 10.5% from June 2021 to 13.5 gigawatts in June 2022, driven largely by new wind farms becoming operational. A further 16.7 gigawatts of renewable electricity is currently in the pipeline, which does not include any of the ScotWind project, which could deliver a further 27.6 gigawatt of capacity in the incoming year. The Scottish Government is co-hosting a World Energy Council Summit in Aberdeen today, which is focused on three pressing issues: energy security, affordability, and sustainability. Net Zero and Energy Secretary Michael Matheson said, "We are in the midst of an energy crisis which has been compounded by the illegal war in Ukraine. It has prompted governments across the world to consider how to avoid these situations happening in the future," adding, "Scotland's energy transition can increase security of supply and help to make us far more resilient to future international energy price influences." Mr. Matheson went on to say that wind power is already one of the cheapest forms of electricity, and the Scottish Government's expansion plans for both on and offshore wind, supported by other renewable technologies such as hydropower, provide a fantastic opportunity to support an energy transition that not only delivers on Scotland's climate obligations, but which ensures a fair and just transition for Scotland's energy sector on the journey to becoming a net zero nation. Some good news there, Linda.
Yeah, I was really pleased. It was Greenpeace's report that I read about, our record levels of renewable electricity, and I was really pleased because Greenpeace are they don't say things lightly. Yeah, they're rightly critical very often. And so for them to come out and talk about this in such a positive way, I thought was really good news. And certainly one thing that Scotland is not short of is wind and water. So when you look at the onshore and offshore wind generation, and when you look at our hydropower as well, the potential renewables building up, still a way to go in terms of storage, for example, and things we have to do there. But yes, it's good news for the future. And Michael Matheson talking today about all this helping towards a just transition. Yeah, it's good news.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, it's not immediate good news for those that are going to be suffering through the energy bills
yeah,
that have been created by all sorts of things, but not helped enough by the UK government.
yeah,
Um, but for the future, yes, good news.
yeah. So Moving on, average decline of almost 70% across animal populations since 1970. Earth's wildlife populations have plunged by an average of 69% in just 50 years, according to a leading scientific assessment, as humans continue to clear forests, consume beyond the limits of planet, and pollute on an industrial scale. From the open ocean to tropical rainforest, the abundance of birds, fish, amphibians, and reptiles is in freefall, declining on average by more than two-thirds between 1970 and 2018, according to the WWF and Zoological Society of London's biennial Living Planet report. 2 years ago, the figure stood at 68%. 4 years ago, it was at 60%. Many scientists believe we are living through the sixth mass extinction, the largest loss of life on Earth since the time of dinosaurs, and that it is being driven by humans. The report's 89 authors are urging world leaders to reach an ambitious agreement at the COP15 Biodiversity Summit in Canada this December and to slash carbon emissions to limit global heating to below 1.5 Celsius this decade to halt the rampant destruction of nature. The Living Planet Index combines global analysis of 32,000 populations of 5,230 animal species to measure changes in the abundance of wildlife across continents and taxa, producing a graph akin to a stock index of life on Earth. Leading nature charities have accused Liz Truss for putting the economy before nature protection and the environment and are concerned rare animals and plants could lose their protections when her promise of bonfire of EU red tape happens later this year. The report points out that not all countries have the same starting point with nature decline, and that the UK has only 50% of its biodiversity richness compared to historic levels, according to the Biodiversity Intactness Index, making it one of the most nature depleted countries in the world. Land use change is still the most important driver of biodiversity loss across the planet, according to the report. Mike Barrett, Executive Director of Science and Conservation at WWF UK, said, at a global level, primarily the declines we are seeing are driven by the loss and fragmentation of habitat, driven by the global agricultural system and its expansion into intact habitat, converting it into produce food.
Yeah, I was really shocked at that report. I read into it quite a lot, and again, it's that bigger picture stuff. It's like the tiniest wee thing that happens somewhere can have such an ongoing effect on so many other things in the ecosystem. And this has been what's happening. I read into it further and I took a few notes, Anne, if you excuse me reading them, because when I looked at it, it said that it's Latin America and the Caribbean region, which of course includes the Amazon, that's had the sharpest fall, a 94% drop in these years. Horrendous. When you look at it, it's, a result of, we've all been hearing for years and years and years about deforestation, what's been happening in the rainforest. And then there's the palm oil that we probably, even though we try not to, end up using in products that are demanded in our part of the world. And all these things matter. And this shows you starkly what the result of these things are. And, governments should be doing the best they can to stop this going any further. And yes, it is worrying when we have a government here in the UK that is abandoning an awful lot of the good practices that have come from the EU, and I suspect will just abandon the whole zero carbon initiative as well if they're allowed to carry on.
Yeah.
Because for them, it's all about the economy, and they don't look at that bigger picture that in the longer term protects us all. So I think this report is stark and a real worry for everyone.
Yeah. So,
Do you know,
home
see when
office,
you've got
yes.
scientists saying that this is going to be the sixth mass extinction? That's horrendous.
Yeah.
We're all supposed to be smart people. We're all supposed to be cleverer and more capable than human beings have ever been. And what are we doing? We're
Yeah.
destroying everything round about us and bringing on the sixth mass extinction.
Yeah. Let's hope they will
Oh,
listen to the scientists and, yeah, hoping for the best. So, yeah, as we move on to Home Office reclassifies modern slavery as illegal immigration issues. The UK Home Office has taken the modern slavery brief away from the minister responsible for safeguarding and classed it as an illegal immigration and asylum issue. According to the updated online ministerial profiles, the move is seen as a clear sign that the department is doubling down on Suella Braverman's suggestion that people are gaming the modern slavery system and that victims of the crime are no longer being prioritized. The previous safeguarding minister, Rachel McLean, had modern slavery on her official list of ministerial responsibilities, but her successor, Mims Davies, has no mention of the crime on her list. Instead, modern slavery is listed at the bottom of the illegal immigration and asylum brief of Immigration Minister Tom Parsclove. Under Theresa May, the UK government pledges to be world leader in combating modern slavery, but Braverman said last week that trafficking claims from people gaming the system were derailing the UK's policy on illegal migration. Charities working with victims say characterizing the crime as an illegal immigration issue is dangerous. More than a quarter of all people identified as potential modern slavery victims are UK citizens, according to the official statistics. Olivia Field, head of policy at the British Red Cross, said modern slavery is a crime that can impact people no matter where they are from or where they are in the world, adding from our work supporting people who have been through horrific experiences, including sexual exploitation and human trafficking, we know there are urgent improvements needed for to better protect and support survivors. Despite Braverman's claim of people gaming the system, 97% of all modern slavery referrals concluded in the first half of this year were confirmed as genuine by the authorities. The chief executive of the Gangmasters and Labour Abuse Authority, Elsia McFray, contradicted the Home Secretary's comment, saying, "We don't see people gaming the system. What we see is vulnerable people who are being exploited by opportunists and criminals." This comes after she just said, spoke about her dream of seeing on the telegram an
do you
aeroplane
know,
taking people to Rwanda.
and do you know, I think to myself, we never thought we could get a worse prime minister than Boris Johnson, and we got one. I never thought we could get a nastier Home Secretary than Priti Patel. But boy, oh boy, have we got one with Suella Braverman. She is a nasty, horrible individual. And to use the word that has become well known, I detest her. Not just her policies, I detest her as someone who would dream about shipping people off to Rwanda, who would dare to look at people who have been trafficked and call them illegal immigrants. It is vile. I want to see the small print in what they're doing here. I hope that there will be MPs in their own Conservative Party down there who will be railing against this. Now, I know you do come across the odd decent Conservative Member of Parliament. There are some people there in Westminster just now sitting on the Tory benches, I am sure, who are struggling. I just wish they would come out and walk the floor or whatever it takes. But this is just awful. We know that human trafficking exists. We know in Scotland, we introduced legislation a few years ago to try and protect those who have suffered from human trafficking. And it's not just sexual trafficking that goes on. You know, it's about domestic service, it's about gangmasters. We know it happens. And all of a sudden, the victims are being deemed to be criminal. And there is no compassion whatsoever in a policy that would say that. I didn't see much reporting about that today, Anne. I had to look for it. And it's one of these things that this government has become very good at. They create chaos. They get things spoken about that are covering all the mainstream press. And then under the radar, they slip through harmful things to people, nasty, horrible things that are going on. And I wish that the mainstream press, as well as wonderful organisations like Broadcasting Scotland, would highlight this stuff much more than they already do. Because I believe that the majority of people right across the UK are fairly decent. And if they knew the truth of what's going on in their name, then there would be outrage and uproar.
Yeah, let's hope for the best on the same as well. Prominent conservative politician Ali Larijani calls for hijab policing rethink. The first crack have started to appear among Iran's political elites over the country's month-long women-led protest, with a senior figure calling for a re-examination of the enforcement of compulsory hijab law and an acknowledgement that the protests have deep political roots and are not simply the product of US or Israel agitation. The call for restraint came from Ali Larijani, a former speaker of the Iranian parliament and an impeccable establishment figure. His tone contrasted with a continued uncompromising line on Wednesday from the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, parliament and security forces, as well as concerted efforts to undermine the credibility of the family of Mahsa Amini, the 22-year-old Kurdish woman who died after being arrested by morality police last month, sparking a wave of protests across the country. Protesters had called for a mass rally in Tehran on Wednesday after violence overnight in the capital and in Kurdish towns of Sanadaj, Saqqez, Bukhan, and Degolan. Many shops remained shut in protest against the regime, while a demonstration led by the Tehran Bar Association was broke up by security forces. Internet blackouts have continued in an effort to stop the protesters' gathering, as it has become increasingly clear that many of the streets are no longer only interested in the policing of the hijab, but want the entire regime overthrown.
Yeah, you know, the women in Iran who have been protesting the way they have, I am absolutely astounded by their bravery. Astounded. And, one of the This was one of the things that was discussed at the SNP conference at the weekend, with heartbreaking contributions from some SNP women about this, and the conference condemned the actions of the Iranian government. This politician who has come out now, or former politician, I think, who has come out to, well, not so much condemn it. I think he's being tactful, I think, in how he's putting this, and I certainly wouldn't criticise that, because there are ways of doing things that he may feel is the best to try and help the situation. But I'm glad he's come out and said something, and I hope that this will open the dam, if you like, of others coming out in support, and that we may see some improvement in the conditions for women in Iran, because it's about keeping down women.
Yeah.
It's misogyny of the very, very worst kind. And my goodness. And you know, just as an aside, I was absolutely horrified.
Sorry,
to
Linda,
see
your
a
line is not
conservative.
very clear. So,
Oh
yeah,
dear.
I'll probably
Yeah.
have the studio just work on that as I go to the next
Okay.
piece, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I feel a bit of noise in the background. All
Okay.
right. Alex Jones ordered to pay Sandy Hook families $965 million. A jury in Connecticut has decided that conspiracy theory Alex Jones has been should pay $965 million to the people who suffered from the false claim that the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting was a hoax. At the conclusion of the lawsuit filed by the relatives of 5 children and 3 educators killed in the mass shooting, plus an FBI agent who was amongst the first responders to the scene. The verdict is the second big judgment against the InfoWars host over the relentless promotion of the lie that the 2012 massacre never happened, and that the grieving families seen in news coverage were actors hired as part of a plot to take away people's guns. In August, a Texas jury awarded nearly $50 million to the parents of another child shot at Sandy Hook. The Connecticut trial featured tearful testimony from parents and siblings of the victims who told how they were threatened and harassed for years by people who believed the lies told on Jones' show. Strangers showed up at their homes to record them. People hurled abusive comments on social media. Erica Lafte, the daughter of the slain Sandy Hook principal, Dawn Hawksprung, testified that people mailed rape threats to her house. Mark Burden told how conspiracy theorists had urinated on the grave of his 7-year-old son, Daniel, and threatened to dig up the coffin. Testifying during the trial, Jones acknowledged he had been wrong about Sandy Hook. The shooting was real, he said, but both of the courtroom and on his show, he was defiant, calling the proceedings a kangaroo court and mocking the judge. Jones called the plaintiff's lawyer the ambulance chaser and labeled the case an affront to free speech rights. 20 children and 6 adults died in the shooting on 14th of December 2012. The defamation trial was held at a courthouse in Waterbury, about 20 miles from Newton, where the attack took place. The lawsuit accused Jones and Infor's parent company, Free Speech Systems, of using the mass killings to build his audience and make millions of dollars. Experts testified that Jones' audience swelled when he made Sandy Hook a topic on the show, as he did his revenue from product sales. In both the Texas lawsuit and one in Connecticut, judges found the company liable for damages by defaults after Jones failed to cooperate with court rules on sharing evidence, including failing to turn over records that might have showed whether InfoWars had profited from knowingly spreading misinformation about mass killings. Jones now faces a third trial in Texas near the end of the year in lawsuit filed by parents of another child killed in the shooting. Families and their attorneys hailed the verdict. Chris Matei, an attorney for the victim, said, "We are going to enforce this verdict as long as it takes because that is what justice requires." It is certainly how much of the damage Jones will actually pay. So, Texas trial that Jones and his company were worth as much as 270 million.
Well, Anne, you certainly have all the nasties in your
Yes,
news report
today.
tonight. Yeah, what a horrible man.
Yeah.
To think, doing that, the suffering
Hmm.
of these
Yeah.
poor families. But
Yeah.
I'm stunned at the people that bought into it and then started to abuse these families by
Yeah.
threats on social media, etc.
Hmm.
Absolutely awful. Um, and it's ongoing. It's not over yet.
Yes, it is
So
not
there's more
over
to
yet.
come on that one. No.
Yeah, true. So, new Glasgow custodial unit for women. A new community custodial unit is set to open in Glasgow, which will change the way women in the justice system are supported in their reintegration back to communities. The Lilies Centre will house up to 24 women and continues Scottish Government's vision of managing female offenders in a way that better supports their rehabilitation. The centre marks an ambitious departure from long-standing practice by stepping away from the traditional image of prison to focus on custody in the community. Women will be encouraged to take responsibility of their own reintegration through community contact and access to local services. The centre's completion is part of a wider 600 million pounds plan to improve Scotland's custodial estate and follow the opening of sister unit, the Bella Centre in Dundee, in the summer. Work is also progressing on a new national prison for women in Stirling. Cabinet Secretary for Justice and Veterans Keith Brown visited the newly completed Lilia Centre developed by the Scottish Prison Service today. Mr. Brown said the Lilia Centre is helping to embed a step change in the way Scotland supports women in custody by focusing on creating safer communities and shifting societal attitude and circumstances which perpetuate crime and harm. By introducing a gender-specific and trauma-informed approach to managing and supporting women in custody, the new facility will help better prepare them for their integration back into their communities. This, in turn, will reduce the chances of reoffending by enabling women to build family ties while allowing support, partnerships in the locality to flourish. Some good news at least.
Yeah, yeah, this has been a long time coming, Anne. I mean,
Yeah.
for many, many, many years, all the Inspector of Prison reports, have shown that the majority of women who end up in prison
Yes.
have been for minor crimes,
Yeah.
with many societal reasons for them. Also, a lot of mental health issues, and
Linda,
social problem issues.
if I may
So
ask,
this
is
is
this part
much
of
better.
what women independence was advocating for? Would you know?
Absolutely, you're right. You're right, because there was talk some years ago of building a big women's prison, and a new one to replace Cornton Vale. And there was a big campaign, and Women for Independence were part of that, saying that, this is not the answer. This is not the way forward. And I'm so glad that the Scottish Government listened and that we now have two sensible units, and we're talking about more in Glasgow and Stirling. Now, should never take away from the fact that I'm not saying that there aren't women who do very bad things and are criminals, and there's a different kind of incarceration, if you like, that would be necessary for that. But the facts quite clearly show that most women who end up with custodial sentences are, in a way, victims of society as well. And very, very often too, when you look at the statistics over the years, women were more likely to be jailed for lesser offences than men were. So
Yeah.
this is a good way forward. And we've got to think too of the families
Yeah.
out with jail, with women as caregivers.
Yeah. Right.
It's about
Funding.
not re-offending.
Yeah. Right. Thank you. Funding to support innovation and knowledge sharing in agriculture. A range of projects aimed at tackling climate change and enhancing competitiveness in the agriculture and food production sector have received funding of more than £370,000. The 7 awards are part of the Knowledge Transfer and Innovation Fund, KTIF, with funding focused on projects which help maximize resource efficiency, cut emissions, and enhance viability. These KTIF projects support knowledge transfer and learning, as well as innovative on-the-ground improvements in agricultural competitiveness, resource efficiency, environmental performance, and sustainability. Rural Affairs Secretary Mairi Gujon said, "We have ambitious targets across the agricultural sector in terms of net zero goals, enabling the essential role of agriculture and addressing the need of food security. These are issues that affect us all, and investment in these successful projects will contribute to meeting these targets." Oh, Linda, I thought I only had bad news today. This is not too bad.
This is good news. But you know, I was having a smile to myself when you were reading it out, and because I don't know why governments don't actually put things out that are in easier to understand terminology. You know, when I saw this thing about what is it again, I had to write it down. Knowledge transfer,
And
something, something.
innovation funds.
All right, aye, very good. What does that mean? And when you actually look at it further, it's about food security. It's
Yeah.
about making things better. It's about sharing techniques for food security. And when I looked at it, there's an initiative that's been given money that's about potatoes. There's an initiative being given money that's about barley. And all these things matter and they all go towards the food security. So, yes, it's good news. I'm glad we're doing these things. But I just wish sometimes that when governments put over what they're doing, they don't put it over so that it actually goes over your head, but put it in language that we can, or certainly maybe everybody else can understand it, but I can't very often. So,
Let's hope
yes,
they
good news.
let's hope they're listening and they will do something about that. Really, really nice to have you,
I don't know, I've been
Linda,
trying for
today.
decades.
Yeah, really nice to have you in discussion today. I'm
Thank you.
always delighted to have a chat with you. And well, that is it for this evening. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So, to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Our programs will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new subscribers to enable us to employ staff to make more programs. That's all from me. And thank you, Linda, for joining me. And it is a good night.